Most people think retirement planning is about one number. They ask one question over and over. How do I get the biggest Social Security check possible? I have never thought that was the right first question. The right first question is this: what are you giving up in order to get that bigger check? That is the part most people skip. They look at age 62, 67, and 70 as if this were a simple prize table. Wait long. It sounds clean, it sounds rational, it sounds responsible, and because it sounds responsible, millions of people never examine the cost of that advice. I have spent my life thinking about trade-offs, not slogans, not rules repeated by people who never stop to ask what sits on the other side of the equation. The problem with the popular Social Security conversation is not that it contains no truth. The problem is that it contains only one truth. Yes, the monthly check is larger if you wait. That part is easy. What is harder and much more important is asking what your household must do from age 62 until the day that bigger check finally arrives. If the answer is that you can wait comfortably without touching anything important, then fine. Waiting may work well for you. But if the answer is that waiting forces you to raid retirement accounts, trigger taxes you could have delayed or controlled, lock your spouse out of benefits, or spend down the years when your health and energy are at their peak, then what looked like discipline may actually be a very expensive mistake. I want to explain this in the plainest way I know how. A lot of people treat Social Security as though it exists in isolation. It does not. It sits inside an entire retirement system. Your IRA matters, your Roth IRA matters, your 401 matters, your taxable account matters, your spouse matters, your tax bracket matters, your health matters. The years in which you can still travel, still move well, still see clearly, still wake up with energy, those matter too. Once you see the decision that way, the neat little slogan of wait as long as possible begins to look incomplete, sometimes dangerously incomplete. I am not saying age 62 is always best. I am saying that for many people, especially the ones with meaningful retirement savings and ordinary real-world needs, claiming at 62 can be smarter than waiting to maximize a single government payment. That sounds backwards to people because most people have been trained to maximize the wrong thing. They try to maximize the later check. I would rather maximize the entire retirement. That is a very different objective. Let me start with the first mistake. People compare checks, but they do not compare funding sources. If you retire at 62 and delay Social Security until 70, the money to live on has to come from somewhere. There is no magic in that gap. Groceries still cost money. Housing still costs money. Insurance still costs money. If your lifestyle requires $4,000 a month and Social Security at 62 would have covered $2,000 of it, delaying means you must find that missing $4,000 somewhere else for 8 full years. For many households, that somewhere else is a retirement account. Now think carefully about what that means. People will say, I am delaying Social Security because I want a bigger guaranteed check later. But in order to get that bigger guaranteed check later, they spend down the very assets that were capable of compounding for them the whole time. That is like watering the flowers by cutting down the tree. Suppose you are 62 and you have $300,000 spread across retirement accounts. Suppose your benefit at 62 would be about $2,000 a month. Suppose you need $4,000 a month to live. If you delay Social Security and pull the full $4,000 from your accounts every month until 70, you do not just spend money, you destroy optionality, you reduce the base that could have compounded. You may even force yourself to sell assets in weak markets. You take what should have been an engine and turn it into a fuel tank. Now look at the alternative. Take Social Security at 62, use that $2,000 a month as a bridge. Now you only need $2,000 a month from the portfolio instead of $4,000. Over 8 years, that is a difference large enough to change the shape of retirement. Less money leaves the account. More money remains invested. More money keeps compounding. If the account earns a reasonable return over time, that preserved principal can matter more than the increase in the later monthly benefit. This is where a lot of people get confused, because they think in straight lines. They say, if I wait, my check rises. That is true, but your retirement is not lived in a straight line. It is lived in a network of consequences. Larger checks later can come at the price of smaller balances, fewer options, and more tax friction along the way. I have always liked businesses that can keep capital inside the machine and reinvest it at good returns. Why? Because compounding is most powerful when you leave it alone. Retirement accounts are no different. A Roth IRA that is left untouched can continue growing tax-free, A traditional IRA or a 401k can continue compounding tax deferred until required distributions begin. The longer money stays in that shelter, the harder it can work for you. So here is the odd thing. In some cases, claiming Social Security early is not the aggressive move. It is the defensive move. It is the move that protects your compounding base. People miss that because they are hypnotized by the size of the later check. They do not ask the next question. What is the price of waiting? The price of waiting is not measured only in foregone checks. It is measured in withdrawals you would not otherwise have needed to make. It is measured in future growth you gave up. It is measured in taxes you may trigger sooner or in higher amounts. It is measured in flexibility lost. That is mistake number one. People maximize a line item and ignore the balance sheet. The second mistake is treating break-even age as the whole analysis. You have probably heard this argument before. Someone says if you claim at 62 instead of 67, you come out ahead until around your mid to late 70s. If you claim at 62 instead of 70, the break-even point might land around 80 or 81. Therefore, they say, if you expect to live past those ages, waiting wins. I do not mind simple math. I mind incomplete math. Break-even calculations are fine as far as they go. The problem is that they do not go far enough. They assume your life unfolds exactly like an average spreadsheet. They assume the value of $1 at 63 is the same as the value of $1 at 83. They assume taxes do not matter much. They assume portfolio withdrawals are harmless. They assume your spouse's situation can be folded into a tidy generic answer. They assume your health and energy are just background details. Life does not work that way. $1 received at 62 can have more practical value than a larger dollars received at 75. Why? Because the early retirement years are often the years when people can actually use money best. They can travel, they can help children or grandchildren, they can relocate, they can try part-time work on their own terms, they can enjoy the freedom they spent decades paying for. There is a reason I dislike elegant theories that ignore human reality. Retirement is not won by maximizing one formula. Retirement is won by aligning money with real life. So yes, break-even age matters. No, it is not enough. A person with strong longevity in the family, excellent health, very little savings, and a desire for maximum guaranteed lifetime income may reasonably decide to wait. I have no quarrel with that. But another person with moderate health concerns, several $100,000 in tax-advantaged accounts, a spouse whose benefits are connected to the decision, and a strong desire to preserve those years of higher energy may reach the opposite conclusion. That second person is not making a mistake. That second person may be doing better math. The third mistake is ignoring taxes until it is too late. I have never met a dollar that became more attractive because taxes were forgotten. People talk about Social Security as though the amount on the statement is the amount you keep. That is not always true. Social Security taxation depends on the rest of your income, and this is where timing matters in ways many retirees fail to appreciate. Imagine two periods in retirement. In the first period, you are in your early 60s. You may have little wage income. Required minimum distributions have not started. Your taxable income may be lower than it will be later. In the second period, you are older. Your retirement accounts may be larger. Required distributions may have begun. Investment income may be higher. You may have sold a business or property. Your spouse's income picture may be different. Suddenly, a benefit you waited years to enlarge may be taxed more heavily than you expected. Now ask yourself a simple question. Is a bigger check still better if more of it is exposed to tax at the wrong time? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. That is why broad slogans fail for some households. Taking Social Security earlier, while other income is relatively low, can produce a surprisingly efficient result. A smaller benefit that is taxed lightly or not much at all may leave more spendable cash than a larger benefit received later under heavier tax pressure. At the same time, smaller withdrawals from traditional retirement accounts in the early years may create room for strategic Roth conversions while tax brackets are more favorable. That last part is worth real attention. Most people talk about Roth conversions only after they have already made every other decision. I prefer to think in sequences. If claiming earlier reduces the need to pull large sums from tax-deferred accounts, you may gain control over how much income shows up on the return each year. That control is valuable. It may let you convert portions of traditional IRA assets into Roth assets, deliberately instead of reactively. Over a long retirement, those choices can shape taxes more than a later Social Security increase. The point is not that every retiree should rush to claim and rush to convert. The point is that retirement is a system. Claim timing affects withdrawal timing. Withdrawal timing affects taxation. Taxation affects how much you keep, and what you keep is ultimately more important than what you are promised on paper. The fourth mistake is forgetting that Social Security is often a household decision, not an individual one. This is where generic advice does the most damage. A married couple is not just two separate benefit statements. The claiming decision can influence spousal benefits, survivor benefits, and the timing of cash flow for the entire household. Suppose one spouse earned far less over a career. Their personal benefit may be modest. The higher earning spouse may have a larger benefit, and by extension, a larger full retirement amount that affects spousal benefits. In some cases, filing earlier can unlock money for the household sooner instead of leaving one spouse waiting for access to a benefit structure that depends on the other spouse's filing status. This matters because households do not live on abstractions. They live on cash flow. A lot of people think they are being prudent by saying, "We are going to wait because the number gets bigger." But while they wait, they may be giving up years of real household income that could have reduced withdrawals, lowered stress, or funded a better standard of living when it was most useful. Then there is the survivor issue. This one may be uncomfortable, but retirement planning that refuses discomfort is not planning. If one spouse is older or one spouse is in weaker health, the survivor benefit becomes very important. Sometimes the smartest approach is not to maximize both benefits in the abstract. Sometimes it is to claim one benefit earlier, preserve other assets, and allow the larger earner's benefit to do what it needs to do for survivor protection later. These are not emotional details. These are economic facts with emotional consequences. Money inside a marriage is not just arithmetic. It is security. It is options. It is the ability of the surviving spouse to live without panic. Whenever I hear blanket statements about waiting, I ask the same question, waiting for whom? The answer is often not nearly as simple as people pretend. The fifth mistake is pretending health is rude to mention. I find that peculiar. We will discuss market volatility for an hour, inflation for an hour, tax rates for an hour, but the one variable that most directly determines whether you will actually enjoy retirement, people tiptoe around as if it were improper. Health is reality. If your parents died young, if chronic illness runs in the family, if you have your own medical concerns, if you simply know that reaching 85 or 90 is not a certainty, you should plan around casually, then that must enter the decision, not emotionally, rationally. Waiting for a larger benefit is a bet on longevity. That does not mean it is a bad bet. It does mean it is a bet. And many people speak as if it were not. If break-even against filing at 62 lands around the high 70s or low 80s, and your personal facts make those ages far less certain than a planner's default assumption, then waiting is not automatically the conservative choice. In your case, waiting may be the risky choice. I am not trying to be grim. I am trying to be honest. One of the great tragedies in financial planning is how often people are taught to preserve money for a phase of life they may never fully reach, while underusing money in the years they are most capable of living. This is related to something I think about often. Retirement is not one uniform block of years. Early retirement is different from late retirement. There are years when people are active, curious, mobile, and eager. Then there are years when the pace naturally slows. Then there are years when activity becomes limited. Whether you plan for it or not, a dollar is not equally useful across those phases. A lot of retirees are richest precisely when they can do the least with it. I do not call that optimal planning. I call it a mismatch between money and life. If claiming at 62 provides more breathing room in the most usable years of retirement, that deserves serious weight, not reckless weight. Serious weight. The purpose of money is not to die with the most impressive forecast. The purpose of money is to support a life. The sixth mistake is failing to distinguish between those who need Social Security as core income and those who can use it as a bridge. This distinction matters enormously. If you have almost no retirement savings, then the guaranteed increase from delaying may deserve a lot of emphasis. A larger government payment later may be crucial because you do not have many other assets to support you. But if you are in a different category, say you have $250,000, $400,000, $500,000, maybe more, sitting inside tax-advantaged accounts, the analysis changes. Now Social Security can be used strategically. Instead of treating it as the thing to maximize at all costs, you can treat it as a bridge that reduces pressure on your portfolio. It can let your investments continue to grow. It can reduce the sequence risk created by heavy early withdrawals. It can give you room to work part-time on your own terms rather than from necessity. It can support sustainable freedom instead of delayed optimization. I like that phrase. Sustainable freedom, not maximum headline income at age 70. Sustainable freedom starting when you actually retire. If you can combine a modest Social Security benefit with modest portfolio withdrawals or with limited earned income below the relevant threshold, you may create a retirement that is both more resilient and more enjoyable. You are not stripping the accounts bare. You are not placing the entire burden on the market. You are not waiting on a future promise while your present balance sheet shrinks. Again, this is not universal. It depends on the facts. But it is far more common than people think. The seventh mistake is confusing certainty with wisdom. People say the later benefit is larger. Therefore, waiting is the smart move. Waiting is the certain move with respect to one variable. That is not the same as wisdom across all variables. Wisdom asks what else changes. Does waiting require larger IRA withdrawals from 62 to 70? Does waiting increase the risk that you sell assets in a bad market? Does waiting cause you to miss years of lighter taxation? Does waiting delay spousal or household cash flow? Does waiting reduce the money available in your healthiest years? Does waiting turn retirement accounts from compounding engines into spending reservoirs? If the answer to enough of those questions is yes, then the bigger later check may be less intelligent than it first appears. That is why I am skeptical whenever one piece of retirement advice is treated as universal. Universal advice is usually just advice that stopped thinking too soon. Let me tell you the deeper idea underneath all of this. The goal of retirement planning is not to maximize a payment. The goal is to maximize the quality and durability of the whole plan. Those are not the same thing. Someone can delay Social Security, end up with a bigger monthly check, and still have a weaker retirement because they withdrew too much from investments, paid more tax than necessary, passed through their strongest years under tighter constraints, or failed to coordinate the decision with the needs of a spouse. Someone else can claim at 62, preserve more capital, smooth taxes, unlock benefits, enjoy early retirement more fully, and still end up in a stronger overall position, even with a smaller check on paper. I know which framework I prefer. I prefer the one that sees the whole chessboard. This is also why I have little patience for retirees who say they are waiting, because that is what smart people do. Smart people do not copy rules. Smart people examine incentives, constraints, probabilities, and consequences. A smart person asks, what happens to my portfolio if I wait? A smart person asks, what happens to my taxes if I claim now versus later? A smart person asks, what happens to my spouse? A smart person asks, how much are my early retirement years worth to me? A smart person asks, am I maximizing a check or am I maximizing a life? That last question is the one almost everybody gets wrong. I have watched people spend decades learning how to save and invest, only to become strangely passive the moment the distribution phase begins. They turn from owners into rule followers. They stop thinking like capital allocators and start thinking like bureaucrats. They ask what the default recommendation is. They ask what the average person does. They ask which option sounds most conservative in a sentence. But retirement deserves better thinking than that. If you were evaluating a business, you would not examine revenue and ignore costs. You would not celebrate a larger top line if it required destroying the underlying asset base. You would not call a decision conservative if it raised one visible figure while weakening the economics of the enterprise. Your retirement deserves the same standard. The delayed Social Security argument often resembles a business that proudly reports higher future revenue while quietly consuming capital, ignoring tax leakage, and reducing strategic flexibility. It may look stronger from one angle and be weaker from a better angle. Now, I want to be fair. There are people for whom waiting absolutely makes sense. Someone with exceptional longevity prospects, little accumulated savings, a need for maximum guaranteed income later, and limited concern about the value of early retirement cash flow may be well served by delaying. I am not fighting reality. I am fighting lazy generalization. Because for many others, the advice to wait has become a superstition. It gets repeated because it sounds responsible. It gets repeated because bigger numbers are easy to market. It gets repeated because household complexity is hard to summarize. And it gets repeated because the emotional comfort of certainty is powerful. But what feels safe is not always what is safe. Sometimes waiting is not prudence. Sometimes waiting is simply expensive. If claiming at 62 allows you to preserve $100,000 or more of extra capital by the time you reach 70, that matters. If claiming at 62 reduces the need to withdraw from traditional accounts and gives you room to manage your taxes, that matters. If claiming at 62 improves household cash flow, while a spouse's benefits develop or a survivor strategy remains intact, that matters. If claiming at 62 gives you more freedom in the years when you can still use it fully, that matters. And if all of those things matter together, then the conventional story that later is automatically better collapses under its own simplification. I think many people are looking at Social Security backward. They think the decision begins with the government check. I think it begins with the portfolio, the tax return, the household, and the life you are trying to support. Once you begin there, the government check becomes one tool among several, not a trophy to be maximized at any price. This is how capital allocation works in every serious context. You do not ask how to maximize one line item. You ask how to deploy resources across the whole system to get the best overall outcome. Retirement is no different. The strangest thing about this topic is that people who would never willingly interrupt compounding during the accumulation years are often talked into interrupting it during the retirement years, for the sake of a delayed benefit increase that may or may not dominate the full picture. They understand the value of capital when they are saving. They forget the value of capital when they are spending. That is a mistake. A preserved dollar inside a well-structured account is not idle. It is working. It is defending future options. It is lowering future stress. It is potentially reducing tax drag. It is creating room for better decisions later. So when you hear someone say, "Always wait," do not argue with the slogan. Replace the framework. Ask them what happens to the accounts during the wait. Ask them what happens to taxes. Ask them what happens to spousal timing. Ask them what happens if health is average, not idealized. Ask them what happens to the value of money across different phases of retirement. Ask them whether they are maximizing a check or protecting an entire plan. That is the conversation worth having. If I had to compress all of this into one sentence, it would be, the best Social Security decision is not the one that produces the largest monthly payment. It is the one that leaves you with the strongest overall retirement. For many people, that will still mean waiting. For many other people, especially those with meaningful assets, ordinary health uncertainty, household complexity, and a desire to preserve the years when money is most usable, it may mean claiming at 62. Not because 62 is magical, not because bigger later checks are unimportant, but because retirement is a system, and systems should be optimized as systems. I have made a career out of looking for situations where conventional thinking becomes blind through repetition. This is one of them. The crowd sees a bigger check and stops thinking. And in retirement, the trade-off is everything. You do not win by maximizing one future payment while weakening the present structure that supports your life. You win by coordinating your assets, your taxes, your spouse's needs, your health realities, and your time horizon, so that money serves life rather than dictating it. That is what wise claiming looks like. It is not a slogan. It is not fear. It is not greed. It is simply the discipline of seeing the whole picture when everyone else is staring at one number. And that discipline, far more than the size of any single check, is what protects wealth. It is also what protects peace of mind. The irony is that many retirees spend years preparing to leave work, but very little time preparing to think clearly once work is over. They know how to accumulate. They are less certain how to distribute. Yet distribution is where all the accumulated discipline is finally tested. This is the test. Not whether you can memorize the government rulebook, not whether you can recite the maximum benefit at 70. The real test is whether you can resist a shallow form of optimization and choose the strategy that best supports the life in front of you. That takes judgment. Judgment is always worth more than rules. So when the question comes, should I claim at 62, 67, or 70? I would not begin by asking which age produces the biggest check. I would begin by asking which choice preserves the most compounding, creates the best tax flexibility, works best for the household, respects the uncertainty of health, and delivers money when it is most valuable in human terms. That answer will not be identical for everyone. But the people who ask that better question will usually end up with a better retirement than the people who merely chased the bigger number. In the end, retirement is not about winning an argument with a calculator. It is about building a life that cash flows well, Compounds where it should, pays no more tax than necessary, protects the people you love, and gives you the freedom to use time while time is still generous. That is why I do not start with the biggest check. I start with the biggest truth. A retirement plan is only as good as the life it lets you live. And sometimes, the smartest way to protect that life is to stop waiting.